All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. This is our 100th episode of the podcast. I didn't really know what I was doing 100 episodes ago, and I probably still don't know what I'm doing. For some reason, more and more people keep listening to it, though. And thankfully, Giuliana has been here for the past year, helping make it much more better. So when I started recording in April of 2021, it's like almost 3.5 years ago, the world was kind of trying to come together after getting through the worst of the pandemic. And I started interviewing friends and colleagues that I had not spoken to in a year or two. I was just asking them how they were doing, how they were adjusting, and just kind of seeing what their outlook was going forward. I thought these conversations would help me understand what the next few years would be like. But to be honest, I'm probably more confused than ever now. And after the collective experience we had with the pandemic, I thought the world would, maybe start coming together, but it just seems like,
No.
we're just further divided. People are, still being manipulated by fear. Biodiversity is being lost. Cultural traditions are disappearing. Politics is unstable everywhere. The rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. And the planet is just, falling apart. But at the same time, I think we have a better understanding of the world problems, at least. While we might not be able to sort them out in the near term, I think there's a very real possibility humanity could maybe get its shit together in a century, and the world will look very different. So I thought for this very special 100th episode, we could kind of step back and just let our minds wander and try to imagine the world in 100 years as it relates to food. And I consider all of you friends, but I have also always respected the vision each of you have in your respective fields and just in life in general. And you're all very, very different. But one thing you have in common is that you aren't afraid to think outside the box and to allow yourself to have big ideas and dreams, even if they aren't always appreciated as much as they could be. So thank you all again for coming today. And let's try to imagine the future of food in 2125. So to start off, how do you think we will need to adapt our food situation in the next century to still survive on this planet? Who wants to go first? Anyone? Okay, Giuliana. There we go. Or Julie, sorry. We're going to call you Julie, and Giuliana.
Well, first of all, thank you, Nick, and congratulations on 100. That's perseverance and discipline and a vision, and huge congratulations. I've enjoyed so many of them. But to answer your question, I think we inevitably are going to go towards rotten mold. It's not rock and roll anymore. We know that. We've known that for a while. It's rotten mold. We need to let things rot. We've let it rock for a long time. Now we've got to let things rot. We've got to start eating. I think a lot of foods and ingredients that we think today are either waste or produced on waste or from waste. And I think there has to be a clear shift towards rotten mold and letting things rot. And that as a local way of being able to engage with waste as a food source, because looking at waste is like saying weeds, right? In your garden, until you know that a dandelion is edible or that it has a beautiful flower, it's just a weed, something you're going to rip out. And I think there is a lot of food that is in the collective mind in that way.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I raise my hand.
Sure.
I don't know, but Julie, I'm game. Why? Because usual food is getting scarcer and scarcer, less good than before, more expensive. And I have the impression that even if I care about the food that I buy at the local market and I'm quite strictly, and I pay a lot of attention on what I buy, what I eat, how to cook it. I think that maybe it's not enough, because with certain efforts I can do it. I can choose the right thing to buy, but more and more people, they don't have the means, or they no longer have access to a better way of getting their proper food. And despite the fact that there is more consciousness, more awareness of the dangers of fast processed food, how you should eat, etc., etc., I think that the space, instead of getting bigger, is narrowing down. Personally, I don't want to get out with my tote bags and go to the local market and buy good tomatoes, but tomatoes that most of the people cannot afford. I understand that the amount of energy the producer is doing, etc., and they are worth it. But if I play my part, if you do your thing, if the good neighbors, the good people do, I think and I fear that our politicians are stepping back even in a much bigger way than what they did before. A few years ago, even before the pandemic, everybody was talking, hey, let's do something for climate change, let's push the shift to electric cars. I live in Europe, I live in France. Maybe it's not the most democratic country in the world, but it's not a dictatorship. It's supposed to be rather liberal slash progressive. But even the last two governments, they're stepping back from what they called the change to a proper way of producing electricity, the change for cars, the change for providing food for schools, proper food, etc., etc. I feel personally more isolated than, say, 5 years ago. And I would have the impression that things are going to get better in the short term.
Thank you, Andy. Anyone else? Nephi or Giuliana, want to take a crack at this? We don't have to answer every question, by the way. So
maybe we would need, I don't know, I'm not ironic, a new deal for food, a new deal for different countries really coming together and doing something. Otherwise, I even have the impression that if I do my little bits, I'm part of the privileged, the so-called privileged, and my attention, my concern for doing things right is even used by reactionary parties, decredibilizing this consciousness for the health of the planet, for the renovated form of agriculture. I mean, in France, people from the far right are getting more and more aggressive. It's like in the States when they say, let's pump up the petrol, let's go back, and who cares? We need to provide more jobs to the people. And it's happening all over Europe.
The beginning of the question, what was the core of the beginning of the question? I was really listening intently to you.
Yeah, I mean, so it was, how do you think we will need to adapt our food supply by 2125 to still kind of live on the planet?
I think that's a tough one. I've been thinking about this question since you asked me to be on here, which thank you, by the way. I think there's like two ways to look at it, like best case scenario, worst case scenario. You know what I mean? Because like food and food trends and food access always seem to follow societal trends and norms, power structures, and cultural phenomenon as well. So it's one point. It could be we've got to protect our food systems, but also we might have to come to a point where we will have to leverage those food systems for our own protection, because food can definitely be weaponized. I think we saw that already in the pandemic. We saw how scarcity in how delicate the food system was, and I don't think anyone really woke up from that initial shock. I think for a moment in time, we were really aware of public health and food accessibility, and then it just went back to normal, back to the distractions, back to whatever else was taking place.
Yeah, I think it even got worse.
Yeah.
When
like
you say food scarcity during the pandemic, was like the sudden lack of grapeseed oil, which vanished all over Europe. What are you thinking exactly?
No, I mean, there were disruptions in wheat and in all kinds of things. Just these basically industrial products that we rely on were missing. They were missing from shelves. It didn't get to the point to where we're all starving. There was still enough of that crap to go around, but imagine if the pandemic lasted for 5 years. And it was so severe that we couldn't leave our houses and just had to stick to that same system. Then shit would have really gotten bad. Like there would have been people, just raiding houses and grocery stores, and I don't know.
But it's a sense of false reliance,
Yeah.
Nick. I think that here what there is that we're too used to being able to access foods and ingredients that weren't even in our imaginations until suddenly we see it through a device, at some given point. And there's total disregard in most cases for the incredible foods that one has near geographically that are desired in some other geography. And one clear example of this is quinoa. Quinoa, right, where a lot of indigenous people today can't even afford quinoa, which is their staple food forever. And, quinoa is being shipped, thousands and hundreds of thousands of kilometers to other markets that, just the commodification of staple foods is and just this ability to access any ingredient, that I think the main shift is there. I mean, it's not sustainable. And I would like to think that in 100 years, it's not about just clicking a few buttons, paying extra and getting, and depleting a food source of people who might not have access to an ingredient from where I am just by getting it shipped over. So it's like fundamentally fucked up that we can just eat anything we desire in some countries, and in other countries, you don't, there's no notion or access that's happening.
Yeah, totally agree. What I wrote down is like, when I was thinking about this, I think it's going to go one or two ways in a century. We either end up kind of eating like just 12 ingredients grown on an industrial scale, just because the earth has deteriorated so much that's basically all that can be grown. Just those like 12 things that can just be put together to create food looking substances, and it's just served like in capsules, like the fucking Jetsons, or in those like weird Soylent shakes or whatever that were popular in probably LA for a few years. I don't know if they're still around. Or we completely shift to kind of an ecosystemic way of sourcing food and looking at the world and in eating our regional food supplies and not expecting everything from everywhere all at once all the time. But
Julie, do you
what
think we
happens
can
in
achieve
between those
that?
things? Say that again.
Julie, do you think we can achieve that? The second part, the second option.
I mean, I think if there's a change in an understanding of, the first thing I was saying is that what waste is, and like food waste. So there are so many things that we don't eat, not because they're not edible, but because maybe we're seeing on some fancy food channel there's like a hot chef is just chucking it out. And you're like, well, if he's chucking it out, I'm chucking it out as well. You know, that sort of shift. Or, you know, just to processes where decomposition isn't the end of a food source. And so embracing the fact that what you have around you, you know, has much more than what we know might be edible. And also, past the time that we're used to seeing something pristine and perfect, there might be another process that occurs that might be different, but it's edible and delicious as well. It's close to you. So I think shifting towards, you know, embracing decomposition, embracing waste, I think we can do it. And
Can
I
you
think,
please give us a couple of examples to make me understand? But when you
yeah,
say you going
so,
through waste and
yeah. So for
and rotting,
example, yeah. So for example, there are certain, we go to a grocery shop and we see an apple that has some penicillin on it. It has a mold on it. It has a spot of mold. Nobody buys that. Nobody understands that you can maybe eat most of that apple, and also the mold that's growing on it you can rub on a cut and you've got free penicillin, and you're not giving it to, you know, the pharmaceutical. You've got 2 in 1. You've got a double whammy with a rotten, you know, with a semi-rotten apple. Or just the fact of the processes that a lot of this, you know, like, you know, there's a modern shift towards deliberately putting penicillin and molds on vegetables, right, in a controlled atmosphere in high-end restaurants, because there is an understanding and a move towards the fact that there are processes that come from what today we think are negative, that are decomposition and rot, actually give a value to the food, give a value to the taste, and also don't produce the discarding of an ingredient that you might have near you that might not be picture perfect, right? Not be preservation perfect. So I think that some of those examples where you can eat some moldy fruit, where the fact that, you know, if the melon is not perfectly round, doesn't mean, or oval, it doesn't mean it's a waste product, right? If it has a bulge on one side, it's fine to eat it. And we need to make that shift in our minds towards, you know, this image, like the imagery of food in a certain color, shape, form, like consistency, as only one valid way with ingredients. I think that's really problematic.
I like that, because that could be the introduction to a history book at the end of fine dining. I mean, go tell all those glossy chefs. Go tell all the people who still go spend a shitload of money in glossy restaurants, and they keep entertaining the idea of perfection, of the sublime, of the beautiful, the most powerful. I personally like the imperfections. I mean, I'm not playing 30 Seconds of Glory on me, but the little organic market, which I don't even particularly like it, but every day they have damaged apples or brownish whatever, or 2 days before bread or other stuff, and they sell it half price. So, I mean, and it's a little step, but on the other side, Julie, go tell the Japanese that they only buy apples wrapped like jewels and in jewelry shops. I mean,
But probably the Japanese are the first that are going to be like changed to not, I'm not going to use a harder word, because they're on an island. I mean, they don't have more alternative, right? So there's a combination of what you have and the fact that you can't access anything. In 100 years, what fuel are we going to have to ship the Japanese perfect apples from Chile, for example? You know, and will maybe with the, you know, slower energy, will it get to Japan without a speck of mold? You know, I don't think so.
Yeah.
We just, yeah.
Like, think of a solar powered ship. Like, it's probably not going to go as fast as a, this steam, whatever the hell, oil driven engine, crossing the Pacific. Like, it's going to be slower. So yeah, maybe certain foods will get cut off from certain places.
There is something that really troubles me in the fundamentals of these dynamics, and I think is this obsession of the food industry with what the consumer wants, which is supposed to be determining, food supply and food consumption. And I think it's related with what you were saying, Julie, about false reliance, and Andrea, more is less and seems to be narrowing down instead of enriching us. It's this obsession, and I think AI and technology is obsessively being used or projected as a tool to anticipate what the consumer wants. And honestly, I think that's kind of a sick question, because first, what the consumer wants right now in general, this abstract consumer, is so wrong and so unhealthy and so not even about food anymore. It's not about food anymore. It's not about healing. It's not about community. It's about commodification and individualization and customization. And that's not food anymore. That's not connecting with the environment. That's not feeling what the environment has to offer to feed you, imperfect or not. Is complete disconnection of what food is. So I wonder why everywhere I see consumer, the consumer desire, it's an ill question, and it really troubles me. And I connected that with what you were saying about just false reliance and zero sense of community and zero sense of healing, and more being just less or zero, or deprivation and alienation and isolation. I don't know.
It seems that the pandemic was, one very clear example of it was the sourdough starter. What happened there? Like, when people couldn't go to the bakery every day, right, or they couldn't go and buy bread every 2 days, wherever, everybody suddenly became a fungus cultivator, right? Let's not forget that yeast are fungi. Everyone was cultivating fungi. Everyone was cultivating yeast. Everyone had their starter. People were baking, were making bread. Some of that stuck on, but the sense of false reliance on your local bakery, at least for fresh bread, was gone, right? And people were understanding also in many places the process of making flours, or the fact that there's not only one type of flour, there are many types of flours, right? And so I think it's this just this false sense of reliance. And I think to your point, Andy, I think there's something about all these fine dining. I have some friends who are in the fine dining business, and I follow their work and I follow the space, and it's incredible to see this shift towards, like, it's a massive evident shift towards seasonality, locality, what nobody was eating, seaweeds, like what's in the intertidal, fungi, let's rot the food and make something, or and just this complete shift, as if because I think there's some sort of also a lot of I'm not actually going to speculate as to why. I better not, I might lose friends, but I want to say that there is a shift in the fine dining space, but it's sort of a further commodification of it, because you're really sort of taking up to stratospheric prices the possibility of local foods, seasonal foods, and it's sort of in some way twisting against the current, where I see you nodding.
I don't know about you, but I feel very ill at ease with these things. I might go to one of these pioneering, new, interesting restaurants moving towards seaweed, fungi, whatever. But if the access to this restaurant is even more than before reserved to a narrower niche of people, hey, Houston, we have a problem. I can understand, I can relate. Let's say those guys at the avant-garde, they say, they give the example, and then the others will follow. Maybe, 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 but it also contributes to create isolation, to create beautiful, inspiring ivory towers. So my real question, the question that I ask myself most of the time when I go out for work or for pleasure to restaurants, how can we reduce the gap? How can how can improve the conversation with different tribes of people? Uh, give you an example. I'm joking, but I'm not. For let's say 20 years, we said fine dining great restaurants are for old farts, old boring people. And the right restaurants were with the young kids, youngsters in their 30s, full of energy. Nowadays, most of the time, I feel exactly the opposite. When I go to a restaurant and see there is a few older people and a 41 guy and a couple of 20 something, I feel, hey, there is something happening. Also because each restaurant is specializing, is creating a dialogue which is reserved only to his own tribe. It goes from arrondissement, from quarter to quarter in our cities. It's a selection that comes with a price tag. It's a selection that comes with the ingredients that they use, with the choices that they make. I feel the space of freedom is narrowing down. I don't know if I'm getting paranoid, but that for sure I'm getting more and more bored.
I think like in the context of restaurant food service world, I think looking to the next 100 years, I mean, we can all of us, we can think back the last 25 years to when it was the best products were considered coming in from France or Europe, and that was highly prized, celebrated, and that was the height or the epitome of luxury then. And it's changed just in 25 years. Social justice movements, societal norms, things like the murder of George Floyd, the pandemic, police brutality in America. So
in
the
Europe
next,
too.
yeah, the next 25 years, we could probably stay on the same track if we don't get taken off the rails by another pandemic or another epidemic. Because I think pandemics and epidemics are not just biological; they're also intellectual and emotional and spiritual. We look at colonialism, imperialism, capitalism as a disorder, right? A large mass societal disorder that's global. So I think like the next 25 years, if we're not interrupted by another, dramatic change in our food system or access to fossil fuels or those kind of items, we'll probably continue on this track with where the local sustainable fermentation, the stuff that no one wants to eat, more eating bugs, more crickets, as kind of a trend, and maybe it'll trickle down. But I think population wise, by the time we reach 2050 in the American Southwest where I'm at, minorities like myself are going to be the majority, and that's those values, those traditions are going to cause some demands for change, not just in the food system but education, science, nutrition. And I think those are on the horizon. And all of those things, those phenomenon, are definitely connected to food. I think when we saw this power structure being challenged, this power structure of white supremacy, in the United States was being challenged in this last election. And it just was an overwhelming blowback to not mess with the power system. And it just, it didn't destabilize us yet, but there's more on the horizon. And so value systems that come with a construct or a paradigm, I think those are the biggest threats to our food system. I hope that we continue to improve and build our relationships with landscape and food. Like for me, as a White Mountain Apache person and a Navajo person, we've kind of seen, I say it all the time, is like we saw the world end once, and I'm on the other side of this apocalyptic existence, and this is what reality looks like after our world changed forever. So I think hopefully more micro regional voices that have this relationship with food will be amplified. But the voices that I'm referring to, not just mine, but all of us here, we've got a lot that we fight against. We're up against a power structure that's invisible. So I hope that in the next 25 years, by 2050, there'll be more cool street foods, less fine dining. Hopefully, the techniques and the food and the excitement around fine dining can be translated to the streets, to food carts. You know what I mean? Because I feel like chefs, they're I'm one of them. You know what I mean? But I hope that more people can really listen to what food and history has to teach us, because they're powerful to me. So there's a lot to think, but I think of like thinking about it in increments of 25 years is a way to look at it. I just it's that's why I said in the beginning, it's like it's either doomsday or it's going to be all right. Who knows, man?
But in that line of what I was saying at the beginning about letting things rot and letting things decompose, it's not just food, it's ideas, it's ideals. I've been advocating for a very long time to let things rot, especially ideas and ideals. And because you can't recompose without decomposing, right? It's really important for things to rot. And we see these processes of decomposition. And for me, what's happening today in the food industry is total decomposition. For example, I come from Chile on one side and from a tiny village in Calabria in Italy on the other side. That the food, anybody who can go there can tell you, is perfect. Everything to perfection. Very little ingredients. You can do a lot with those ingredients, but everything grown with love, dedication, and time to perfection. What's happening today when I go to the US and I realize there's nobody who eats at home.
Yeah.
Very few people eat at home. Everybody's walking with their food in the street or with something to drink, and everybody's eating out in restaurants. Nobody pays any attention to the quality of the ingredient, to the quality, giving the time for an ingredient or a dish to be able to mature, to compose. And it's just this complete decomposition of healthy, tasty, righteous, local foods. That's what we're living today in a lot of countries. It's rotted. And I think that, that part of the reputation of, for example, in our case, Italian food, or some French foods is the absolute dedication to one type of food for many years with love, calm, and creativity, and not this over flooding of access of things to replace what was already good that comes from trillion miles away. I don't know, Andy, if you agree with me, but I think that what looks like recomposition and getting out of a process of like societal rot is going back to eat at home. What a grandma did. The rich people are going to be the people who know what to do with a seed. That's going to be the richness in 100 years. And to not only know what to do with one seed, but know how to get more seeds from one seed. And select and go back to having the perfect tomato or the incredible, cheese, and just embracing time in a way, this chronological time You know, the Greeks measured time in two ways, in chronos and kairos. Chronos, the chronological time that we live in today, is like completely messed up. It's like minute, you know, hour, day,
The to-do
week.
list, yeah.
And then kairos, which is the natural time of a process. If I'm in Chile and I want to make wine in August, I'm screwed because the grapes mature in March. I can't make wine in August. Nevertheless, we have been seeing more and more like defiance to that natural time of nature and a process in the food industry, right? We can get a mature avocado at almost anywhere in the Western world at any day of the year. What is that?
It's pure nonsense. It's pure nonsense to me. But I'm not provoking. But in order to push that need, that hunger for a better knowledge, to get a better balance between Chronos and Kairos, shouldn't we get rid of all those restaurants? There are too many. I mean, in Europe, in the States, everywhere there's restaurants, top notch, medium, industrial food, take away, eat out, bring back home, whatever. Do we need that amount of places? Do we need to consume like fast consuming, not having the time when you go back from work, if you're lucky, because you have a work and ingesting your food at home without even thinking? Maybe if we got rid of the aura of cuisine, of the aura of the dictatorship of the big chef, including also the good-willing chefs that promote themselves, embracing sustainability, better agriculture, regenerating, that's greenwashing. You know what I mean? Maybe the first step is to get rid of a shitload of restaurants. We don't need them. And also, where does come from this crazy idea that you go to restaurants every day? I mean, we are spoiled, fucking rich people who think that they can afford to go out, sit down, order, tip people, treating them like escort girls and escort boys. The nicer they are, the richer they get when I tip them. I mean, most of the food scene, for me, seems to getting more and more related to the class system. I don't know if I'm.
Absolutely agree.
Oh,
Yeah, totally agree. You're talking about, someone mentioned AI earlier, and I wanted to start thinking about technology and what effect that's going to have on what we eat. Like there are 3D printers now that can just print out a meal. Like is everyone's house going to have just like a big cooler or pantry that's connected to like a little robot, and you just press a button and it cooks you everything just, as perfect as, Ferran Adria ever could, and you just press a button and it's just, that's it, and you don't have to think about it, you don't cook, you just scroll through a menu and do it. Is that going to be the future?
do we have an expert around?
Well, I can give you actually a personal experience. So a friend of mine that's a chef of a very fine restaurant, and I was like, what do you cook at home? And he's like, I just use the Instant Pot. What do you mean you just use the Instant Pot? I haven't got time to cook like I cook at work. I just put everything in the Instant Pot, press a few buttons, put the timer on, and when I'm back, I can feed my whole family with a delicious meal, but it's all made in one pot. I mean, so what I want to say is that there, I think there's a dissonance to go to what Andy was saying. It's like this culture, right, of what is this about everybody eating out the whole time and everything elaborate and all that. And the reality, even from some of the people that are in that space, of, you know, just making something tasty, yummy, quickly, soon. And I think that the 3D printing thing is sort of stepping back and going towards maybe what fine dining alchemy was at the beginning, when it maybe in some cases, as far as I've read, was more than a trend than about the taste. I mean, I'd be very disappointed if humanity goes back to that, like, sort of, you know, system of thinking that something like the modification and the huge forced alchemy might be something tastier.
Yeah, I don't know. It makes you wonder though, because like it seems the trend, at least for the last 100 years, has just been to make it as simple as possible. So to think as little as possible. That even though, you know, we're talking about a different food system where, you know, it's local and regional and all of that, what does the other side think? Like, they just want easy, they don't want to think. And I think there's always going to be that segment of the global population that doesn't want to cook.
For sure, for sure. But at the same time, now I'm trying to be a little bit optimistic. I'm not going into artificial intelligence, but say, if we, with the help of the politicians, of the institutions, when they go, people, the young kids go to school, they kind of get some sexuality lessons, but also culinary lessons, how to do little things, practical stuff, science, practical science, like the thing that the girls had to go the classes last century.
Build a house, like, you know, basic things, you know, repair plumbing, like, yeah,
okay.
like,
let's
totally.
let's say everybody loves chickpeas, right? You can buy chickpeas in a ton, or you can buy it at the grocery store. You need to let it into water for at least 12 hours. Okay? What most of the people do, the following morning, they throw the water out and they keep the chickpeas, and then they cook it the way they want it. But some chefs know, the French for sure knew, that if you reduce slowly the water where the chickpeas have been sleeping overnight, and if you reduce it, the more you reduce it, the more it becomes, it tastes of shrimps, of fish. And that's also something that you could use to cook a pasta, to cook a risotto, to add to something, but also it's a simple gesture into this not wasting stuff. There are plenty of things. When you cook rice, you cook it for an immediate consumption. But if you keep it in the fridge for a couple of days, not only it loses, you correct me if I'm wrong, Julie, some of the sugars, but it becomes even more digestible, and you could use it for many days. I'm not talking, let's all become wizards and make science fiction cuisine. Not at all. I've always been bad at science as in mathematics. But simple gestures that can be taught, used, showed, and you could pick up easily. Easily. I mean, 25 years ago, some British friends would cook pasta in a small pot with the spaghetti, Alfonso spaghetti, sticking out of the water like this. Now almost no one does it anymore. It took some little traveling, little examples. So if we start with the little things, maybe I'm not that pessimistic anymore. But we need to to give the example, we need some help, not just from Juli, Giuliana, Nephi, Nicholas, but also from local schools, the people who in the government. We need a medium, long-term view.
What if there was just everyone in the entire world was taught how to make beans? Both grow beans, eat beans. It's the most sustainable protein on the planet. If we just shifted so much of our diet away from animal proteins to beans, it would.
It's life skills.
Yeah,
Life skills.
just like that simple thing. Just a whole class, everyone in the 5th grade learns to make fucking beans well, and even to grow beans in a little cup in their windowsill.
We used to. Maybe I'm a bit older than you are, Nick, but I remember
There's a bean class in Chile for the 5th grade.
No, this is in England. In
Oh, okay.
England, 'cause I was born and brought up in London, and we would have to, sprout beans and go through the system, and it was part of primary school was doing that, and just with a little bit of cotton wool and water, you'd sprout the bean and then go to to the soil or whatever. But everything that we're talking about is basically just depicting a broadening distance between our just our grandparents' generation, because our grandparents, I mean, unless they were European royalty, probably just eating at home and actually cooking every day, twice a day. I mean, all life revolves around cooking. Everything all day, you wake up and it's about the bread and the pasta. When in Italy, at least, it's just there's nothing. The first question is, what did you eat today? Like, what are you going to eat tomorrow? Is the second question. It's like, or later. But what we're seeing today, and even in countries that aren't too wealthy, everything revolves around the cooking, but we have been like impregnated with the false notion that success and being wealthy is eating outside of your home and eating things that come from as far away as possible, and it's just and it's in such a short window to the extent of young generations today despising local ingredients, despising the staple foods that have held their people for centuries or millennia. So I mean, it's completely like to the extent of being messed up and fueled. I think what you were saying, Giuliana, about what the consumer wants, I think it's also a false notion of what the consumer wants, because all of this is a construction. It's a mediated construction of how information gets from one person to the other. And so going back to the small, I mean, I know we always get back to this, and it might seem like, an Everest insurmountable problem. But if it was only literally 50 years ago that we were, learning how to eat, cook, and refine the ingredients in our localities, I don't think we should feel that it's Mount Everest to get closer back to that. Because when you lose food, you lose culture, and people aren't making the link between culture and food, and that's a bond that cannot be broken. And I think there's a responsibility from everyone in the industry or anybody who has that notion to keep that bond as tight as possible.
I think like your question about AI and food, I think it would be useful or helpful to see or interesting to see how AI is going to influence big data. There's something out there called big data because we all put out a signal, a sine wave, with where we go on the internet, where we travel. We've all got our algorithms, and big data, they can use it to predict societal problems, outbreaks. Even there's big data scientists in the public health sector that can even use big data to almost even pinpoint and predict suicidality. So I think AI could be useful in those realms where we need specific construction of nourishing food and say healthcare, maybe, but it can also be weaponized. I think it's going to be interesting to see. I think it would be cool as a novelty to be able to go to my refrigerator and print something up and as a snack that I knew was decent and semi wholesome at least. I mean, it could start off as a novelty, but I think we could be forced to utilize it out of necessity, printing food and stuff. To me, it trips me out. I'm like, holy shit, they're printing steaks, and holy shit, they're printing chicken. Like, you know what I mean? It's just crazy. It's insanity. But so I don't know. I don't know where that fits into it, and hopefully we can use it to calculate and create better systems to manage our food system. I don't know. The field's wide open, I think.
Yeah, so the global population is expected to peak at 10.4 billion people in 2086. So that's within the next, 100 years. Less than that. That's 60 years. Right now it's at 8.2 billion people. So another 2 billion people are coming. And, most of that future growth is supposed to be in Africa, plus like some of it in Asia. And then the rest of the world, there's basically nothing. It's basically staying the same or decreasing.
Decline.
Yeah, declining. And, while that is a lot of additional food that's needed, and maybe I'm an idiot, but I don't think it's an unreasonable amount, having another 20% more people on the planet. I think it's something the planet can handle if we just produce food in better ways and we don't waste so much of it. I don't know. I think it's doable. Like it doesn't, like when I see that, it doesn't seem so scary.
I think it's doable in certain regions of the world where people are open to these ideas of health and collaboration, intelligent coexistence, and also the landscapes or geography and climate will impact this population growth too. Tsunamis, maybe someday. Yeah, I don't know. Earthquakes, all kinds of natural disasters could be present also, so would influence it.
Yeah, totally. I'm sure there's going to be mass migration to all over.
But I think one thing is the availability and the possibility, and another thing is the fragility. And what I find deeply concerning is the fragility of what's being considered for the future. So, for example, if we think about AI, can you imagine how fragile? I mean, like I literally I've got goosebumps. I feel sick at the fragility of depending, or of somebody having the power to give you power or not to eat. Right. So these systems. So going back, more and more food vulnerability, less and less food security, 2 billion more people. Sure. But does that mean, your scenario, Nick, of like just these 12 ingredients and we're all eating this powdery, whatever, that dependence is only fueling an imbalance of power that is unsustainable. So just, I find it quite hopeful in a way, like, Andy, if these, fine dining examples do lead the way, there might be a little chance, like, in terms of, all right, we're going to eat this thing that wasn't edible before, but that's actually available all along the coastline. Or we're going to eat, this salad made out of this cosmopolitan weed, right? Like that grows all over the world. And you will depend on rain, which already is fragile. Can you imagine if we add on to that like a transport system or a processing system, or the need for electricity? When we talk about AI, we're talking about electricity. Like, we've got good old fire, and we've got what we have near, and it's more than enough to feed. And so all this false dependence on technology to feed us in 100 years as population grows is also super detrimental. The nature-based solutions are in the past, mostly, right? That's where in many ways, medicine moves that way. In the compounds that we use, we're going back to what ancestors used. In materials, for example, leathers, suede. It wasn't Stella McCartney who invented the mushroom leather. It was the Eastern Europeans, hundreds, thousands of years ago. So maybe it's worth thinking about food in this period and the industry and growth of just taking us, like, actually looking back.
Mhm.
Because one thing might be mass production and what we think, right, might be easier, but if you think about it, just for a second thought, it's just massive, depending on a very fragile system.
I totally agree with you, Julie, and I raise my hand. From the past, people are moving back also for medicine to the past. I agree. But again, we cannot do it alone. Yes, I can go and see my natural oriented doctor. But just think, I live in France, which is, oh la la, big France. We have one of the best social security systems. We can't deny it. But then, a few years ago, 3-4 years ago, the government has been helping big pharma, big companies, and 3 years ago, they totally stopped refunding people who buy homeopathic medicine. I'm talking about little tubes that cost $2. You say, hey, that's not a big deal. I can afford a tube, a $2 tube, but then you need 3, 4, 5, 6 different stuff. And at the end of the month, I can afford it, but most of the people maybe don't. Or they say, if I can have something which can be refunded, maybe I'll go the other way. But what's more important is that it's not only that the government has made the political decision stop refunding homeopathy. It's that why? Because they don't think that homeopathy is a good way for healing people, because it doesn't heal you when you got this, it's more for prevention, etc. So it's a cultural step back, and it's coming from the government. That's why I always keep repeating myself, we need some level of pressure to change, to help the power to shift from the hands of the few who have the power, and incorporate more people. We can buy our homeopathic medicine or use herbs and stuff, but it's the paradigm which is important. They do not believe. They don't want us to believe anymore to what our moms, grandmothers, or ourselves, we know it's or can be good for most of us. Again, it's political.
Julie, you were talking about like the fine dining trickle down effect, and I've always thought of restaurants when they're the best that they're kind of hubs of information. You know, they're these places where they can actually teach you about the local food systems, about ancestral cooking and ingredients. But as Andy was saying, I think when they're in this ivory tower that's just for rich people, like nothing happens with it. It's like I think they do. There should be a restaurant in every town, every region that's really looking at these things, like places like Nephi's place. You know, like exactly like what you're doing, man. Like I think there should be a Cafe Gozo in every town in America. You know, these kind of places that are, you know, just hubs of information. They're just access points. And I wish, you know, they would have government support. The government should support that shit. Like, why not? And they
Like
wouldn't.
the government, sorry.
Go ahead.
The government should support independent publishers, like the government should support freedom of speech, like the government should support minorities
Yeah.
in all sorts of ways. But that is not happening in Europe. I don't think it's happening in the States.
No, like,
so
I get it.
There
Yeah.
are some examples, right? And maybe Nick, you can please shut me down if I'm wrong, because I'm speaking just from the outside. But at one point in time, I mean, it happened. Let's look at Peru. Peru's a really interesting example of a country that had, you know, administrative support, government support to work with what grows there and what lives there and who lives there, right? And to produce, I think, it went many steps further in the, identity and everything you want, but it was about being all these restaurants and the initiatives are hubs of information, of also changing the way people were thinking about maybe like a sardine, an anchovy, or a jack mackerel that we're thinking is just like a reduction fishery, right? It's fish meal, fish oil. And today, it's not just, salmon feed. And you might go to a restaurant they put in value in Peru the local produce and local crops. And I think that's an interesting example that happened there. I don't know, Nick, your view.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that's happened all over Latin America at this point, and it's happening in developing
but
countries.
Not with government support, though. Sorry to interrupt.
Not with government support, but
yeah,
I think the government support was really secondary in this. Like, I mean, they did help, but I think ultimately what that government support did was help commercialize, industrialize certain food products. I don't know if it necessarily helped, people in the Andes or Amazon have better lives or get more value from their products. It caused, producers of quinoa to start losing ancestral methods of producing quinoa to just try and keep up with the, quinoa on the coast that's sprayed with pesticides and things like that. So I don't know if the government support totally helped. And, I think ultimately the people have the power to change this. We have the power to support restaurants like Nephi's or, small publishers or all of these things. But yeah, it would be nice if the government, like some sane, intelligent government officials would, recognize the value in these things, in this like discourse, these kind of centers of information for, creating a better world and not just, financial incentives. Yes.
But the governments are already getting their hands dirty to support stuff, but for the wrong reasons, for the wrong aspects. Think about all those countries around the world who support restaurant guides just in order to provoke more curiosity and increase the tourism. Most of the guys that you can buy all over the world, or the list or the rankings, are government sponsored, subventioned. So, and they say because food is important, but for them food is all important because it's the restaurant scene, and they can help to get more tourists. So again, it's a shift of paradigm. If we manage, I don't know how, to make shift that eagerness of consumerism, that all that money that the governments ship out to get more airlines landing and more people coming and consuming and spending 3-4 days or 1 week in different locations, maybe that could help change a lot. Not spend for consumerism, but you help the locals to get things better produced, better grown, to spread out awareness of how important the ecosystem is, and everything we are talking about. But again, it's the government. We need those factors.
I think for us in our project, like I mentioned in the beginning, I work in my tribal White Mountain Apache treatment center for drug addiction and alcohol abuse. And to us, we look at the root cause of that as intergenerational trauma and grief, complex traumas, health disparities, living in a food desert, even though we're in the most calorie-rich environment in northeastern Arizona. We had to really just recognize for ourselves and create this project, which is Café Gaujon. and it's kind of it's almost kind of going against everything that the ivory tower chefs stand for. Selling luxury, selling experience, curating an experience, getting high over dinner, over drinks, getting high on dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin through our intestinal tract, right? Through this pleasure of eating and fine dining. We exist right in one of the poorest communities in all of Arizona. I think the White Mountain Apache tribe is like the second poorest in the United States, next to Pine Ridge. So the health disparities abound for us, and they're right in our face. So we just to see, because the treatment center is one of our health components, right? But if we were to kind of try to spell it out, say, hey, this is what we're going to do, these are the health modalities, this is the approach, it might not have happened. Through the by focusing on the vocational side and the professional development and promoting Native American foods and Native American cooking, we launched the project not only just for addiction and alcoholism, because those are, you know, stigmatized. Nobody in this food industry, the restaurant world, and hospitality in general, and many other fields want to talk about this. It's pushed to the side. It's not an issue until it's an issue, and it's even puts people in deep states of denial. So it's a very uncomfortable topic to utilize food to remedy and treat the human condition of hurt and grief. But through the foods, we feel like what we've done in Apache land at the cafe is draw out the best behavioral health dynamics that happen transformationally for individuals in a team. These are our guiding principles for the nutritional recovery program. We're place-based. We have a local farm that we work with, and we did our best in the past 2 years. See, it sounds like a really utopian fix for a really deep intergenerational wound. And our project, Cafe Gojo, is going to be there for as long as we can keep it. As long as the life of Cafe Gojo will, hopefully it's 10 years, hopefully it's to 100 years. But the philosophy and the idea, the reconnection to landscape and identity, I feel like is more important than the intricate foods and fancy cooking. We utilize the techniques, but if you came to our environment, you're just going to drive up and you'll pass us because you think you passed a gas station. Well, we turned this old gas station into the cafe, and we're the way we look at it is like we're not doing fine dining food every day. We keep our prices as low as possible because of our demographic. It's extremely impoverished, and we do mostly native foods. We've got a small network of local Apache suppliers, arts and crafts, farmers, foragers, a few hunters. But the priority is not to really amplify and put it out to attract others, because we're not like that. I feel like our approach to food and cooking is to help the human heal, the person heal from this legacy. And so we're not like we have a really beautiful kitchen. If you go to our Instagram pages, that Instagram page or mine, do some really beautiful kitchen work. It looks like a very chefy, awesome thing because that's how I grew up. But it's actually a clinical environment that draws out all these components. And so over the past 2 years since we've been open, we've got all these variables, right? People, culture, land, Apache language, this network of food producers and people in our environment that look just like me or Apaches and Navajos and natives. The next obstacle that we faced was the psychological, spiritual side, where it's like, even though we have all these components, we're doing this great food at a really low cost, and we're highlighting indigenous foodways. The next side of it is, to me, it's a microcosm for society. If we can create these type of programs that focus on health modalities and approaches to foods, the next component is going to be the psychological, like, no, that's not my tradition. Food traditions are very, very intimate, and try to get someone to change their food choices, it's difficult. So I think it's the support can be there, but I think it's a mixture of voices and how those voices get amplified. If if someone, if some high tower white chef in Europe, America, Spain, or someone's highlighted us and said, yeah, this is cool, they're doing great work, we knew it all along, but it would be validated by an outsider's perspective, right? So the challenge we face is definitely, it's telling us we're in for the long haul. The fine dining is not important. The behavioral health is important, and the food is important, and expanding food vocabulary. So I hope that is what we see more of in the future. I really, really do. Like you said, cooking at home. I love that idea of decomposition. Like
Well,
I love we use the same metaphor in our gardening projects, where we let our traumas compost into new life. So cool stuff like that.
I'm listening to you. I'm thinking of a home. I'm thinking of a grandma. I'm thinking like
Yeah.
of a bosom, right? Or el
Mhm.
hogar, we say in Spanish, like the fire at the center. Everything that you described unlocks, in my mind, home,
Mhm.
right? Home, place where when you're really in the shit in life, you just go and have a meal
Mhm.
that holds you with the person that's cooked it with the biggest love in the world from
Mhm.
that, and it has the transformative power. I just wanted to say that as I was listening to you, I could just think of my grandmother and home, and it was very
And
beautiful.
it's kind of ironic too, because like even having all these variables and having access to foraging and land and all this stuff, even that's a luxury, because the people that are benefiting from luxury and opulence and all this, and a lot of money, they say, well, I don't live in the forest, I don't live on the reservation, I don't have a farmer, I don't blah blah blah, you were so lucky, you know what I mean? So there's almost like no balance on the scale, you know what I mean? It's just bickering back and forth,
Yeah,
it's funny to me, but
I
it is what
wanted
it
to
is,
ask
and
you
we're gonna
about
keep moving.
that because what is the solution in the long term to food deserts? And because we are talking about the quality of food, but there is also the access to it, and there is still hunger. It's an
Hmm.
everlasting problem in the history of humanity, and I wonder if that's going to change. And obviously, it's related to connect with the environment and all the things we could eat that we are not, to make sure that gets better. But there's still a huge problem, and the focus cannot be only about the quality of food for the people that has access to what their grandmothers, or this comfort food and actually a home, but hunger, like pure hunger. So I wonder, what is your experience about that, and everyone's, and how this could look different in 100 years, because it hasn't. It might change and fluctuate depending on processed food solutions, temporary solutions, but it's always there.
I feel like well, at least where I'm at, we grow up in hunger, right? We grow up relying on government food programs, which produces the diabetes epidemic for us, and other, it's a root cause of violence for us. Um, so hunger is nothing new to us. I think the thing attached to food is fear, that I'm not like that, I'm not this, that's not us, that's not who we are. So I think the food education piece is really important, and it's really about just that, really kind of zeroing in on that spirit of generosity that's attached to food. I tell people in our classes and stuff all the time, season your food with laughter and smiles. You know what I mean? Welcome people in and try to really tap into that spirit of generosity that all of us feel all the time in the work that we do. But it's definitely going to be a continual struggle. I think because we're close to food, we're close to the problem, but we're also close to the solutions. So I think it's going to be place based in how we approach those things. Definitely, for us, it's a long haul.
Yeah, and just to your point about hunger, and that so I was mentioning I come from a very very tiny village in southern Italy, in Calabria. My grandparents couldn't even speak Italian, let alone know how to read or write, and they were farmers, contadini. And I remember, I mean, my father grew up in hunger, with hunger, food scarcity, high food scarcity. And I remember as, just a little girl, this system of trade, or trueque, we say in Spanish. I remember my grandfather would get up 4 a.m, walk 2 hours to trade, some olive oil he'd made for like a piece of meat, for his grandchild, and then walk all the way back in the system in which again community, this is a system of trade that isn't based on money, but what one produces and what the other produces can make a lot of a difference, and a difference in more than hunger and nutrition, right? So when we look at, because you can, to the point of what Nephi was saying, right, that maybe when these government projects came in, there wasn't hunger, but there's a serious nutrition problem where you've got a diabetes, epidemic, and because nutrition is different than just anyway. I just want to put that out there, that these systems of where there might be scarcity of others, there are other ways that nutrition kicks in, but in these large areas of land where soil is depleted, where droughts are hitting, crops don't grow, monocultures of crops where there's seeds that are not adapted to the place where they're being planted. Those are all, again, just very big, in my view, capitalist driven problems of and areas that are being sacrificed, either with experiments, chemical experiments, market experiments, and generally just every other word would be very harsh, but so and then those two ways, I think, one that is the hunger in a nutritional way, and then the other one is just this sacrificial view of a lot of food systems to areas.
We could. This is so complex, and I don't think we're gonna figure out
Something
the future
fun
in this
about,
call, but
how this can look in 100 years, like just pure fun.
yeah. What are going to be the restaurant trends in 100 years?
Or the
The
non-restaurant
more
What's
fun
trendy?
There are
Is it
still restaurants.
To Andrea's point.
the non-restaurant trend, the home cooking trends? Yeah.
No. She's right. I mean, do you remember, guys, when in 1973 the musician Brian Eno wrote like a pamphlet saying music
Yes.
for non-musicians? Maybe the next thing would be a non-restaurant, something which is much less, more open, not like a closed system, like a closed program, like in computers. When you do something closed, you cannot access, you cannot share, you cannot forward. We need more open systems. And personally, I don't see the restaurant as they are now as open systems for many reasons. And when I hear what Nephi is doing in Arizona, saying the anger, saying sharing knowledge, going forward despite the lack of help, and not even believing that some help from outside could improve things. Maybe I find some hope in that. Definitely more than for what you can see in most of the restaurants all over the 5 continents. I think that they are so conservative, so unopen to change. If I were a real Marxist, I would say that they are the enemies nowadays. But I wouldn't go that far. But for sure, I don't trust them that much.
It's fragile. It's very fragile. It's fragile, and I think that it's just that I think thinking about fragility in 100 years and what that's going to look like. And I mean, it's really sad that somebody can't, how do you say, can't get pleasure from just eating a really tasty boiled potato.
Mhm.
I mean, like, come on, like, or just, just biting into a really, really lovely matured on the plant tomato or whatever. So I just think, there has to be something going back. Going back seems to be a really good way to go forward. And going back in hunger-stricken lands too. I've just finished a fellowship at Durham University in the UK. There's incredible soil scientist from Zimbabwe who gave us a huge talk about the disaster, the hunger disaster with people planting maize. First of all, maize in Zimbabwe. Right? We're just going to put that there, like from the Americas to Zimbabwe, using seeds that they have to buy year to year, with practices and with the land that are new. And he conducted an experiment with the elders of his community who would go to the nearest forest, collect the leaves, year to year, this labor intensive feeding of the soil. And the maize would grow like 2 to 3-fold quicker, bigger, and was resisting drought. So what I want to say is that there's even in those areas where some people lose 100% of their crops year to year because it hasn't rained, they lose that 100% with these new practices, and there's extreme hunger there. But going back and looking back at what their ancestry, the technologies and the biotechnology that their ancestors developed that was lost in one generation, when they go back to that, they don't lose 100% of the crop. They might lose 50% of the crop, but not 100. So this thing about looking back seems to be quite key in every sense, looking back into how we were eating, what we were eating, how we were preparing it, the love and care and tenderness with which ingredients were treated by people who had the time to do that.
Julie, I'm in Italy, in Gardone Riviera, close to a fantastic restaurant. And yesterday we went to see a small producer who was, and we are in the middle of winter, was selling very close to his farm in the morning, all his stuff. And I've seen cabbage, cime di rapa, red spinach, and a few people came to eat. This morning I went to see, and this guy is the son of people who are very esoteric. They say mantras to the vegetables, that sort of stuff. This morning I went to see another small producer, and he came 23 years ago from Romania. Is doing is on a project on regenerating the soil. Is waiting time for. He said, the new potatoes, they are just starting to grow again. They are incredible, etc. Yesterday night, the restaurant was closed and we ate together. And just the pleasure of eating that fresh, curly cabbage, slightly pan-fried, as simple as that, with some cheese on the side. You could feel the energy of the product, the energy of all those greens, and it goes also for the salads. Maybe when we say going backwards, it also implies trying to convey the notion of the pleasure of the life of the food, How many times when we go to restaurant we said, "What did you eat?" Dead corpses, right? But it also comes when you buy not very good products, mass processed salads, cabbage that comes by tons, and everyone looks like, and all of them looks the same perfectly, the same shape, etc. So the notion of pleasure, the notion of life, of imperfection, it's a cultural thing, and it's a rush against time. Shall we be able to again to change the paradigm or not? Um, I hope so. I hope so. If we do it as much as possible, and if we get more people on board, maybe it can be done. Dealing with the notion of scarcity, of future scarcity, paying more attention, uh, giving more value to what we consider as being possible food. I don't know if I made sense, but
Yeah, no, I think I honestly am surprised throughout this whole conversation how kind of in agreement we all are. You know, for the most part, I think the ideas are there. You know, it's just a matter of spreading them. I guess I don't know, but I think we all generally want the same things, and I think most people want the same things. Most people want food that's alive, that's rotting and whatever, like like rotten roll, man. I think I think in 100 years, I think shit's gonna get really bad very quickly, but I think it's gonna hit a point to where people wake up and they're maybe forced, maybe just just awakened. I don't know that they're gonna make the right changes, and I don't know.
should another
Sorry, go ahead.
so should another pandemic help?
I don't know. Like I think there's going to be enough bad stuff already of that maybe we don't need it to waken us up more. But I don't know. I found hope in this conversation, and I hope all of you did too. And I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules for thinking about all these weird things and just kind of seeing where it went and letting your mind wander.
I want to highlight three words that each of them said. One is the notion of life, Andrea. Giuliana, imperfection, which I think is a key point of food quality. And then Nephi, generosity. I think these are three key aspects to spread that word. So thank you.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfect way to end. So thank you all. This was wonderful. And
I hope we can meet together someday somewhere.
Yeah, I hope in 100 years our great grandchildren will, talk. Yeah. We'll this podcast will be an episode. All right, everyone.
Thank you so
much.
Thanks to all.
Thank you, everybody.
All of you.
Keep up the great work.
Yeah.
Big